This is about what Charlie Munger can teach you about leadership. We're going to focus on 5 mental models for sharper decisions, better judgment, and leading through change. My name is Ramona, and this is episode 315 of the Manager Track podcast. Charlie Munger never wrote a book about leadership. He also never gave a TED Talk on management. In fact, he never ran a company with thousands of direct reports and a chief people officer and an annual engagement survey. That was not him. He spent most of his life as the quiet half of Berkshire Hathaway, sitting right next to Warren Buffett. In fact, he was known to be someone who would say very little in public and someone who is constantly reading. And despite him not having led an organization or written a book about leadership or done a TED Talk or you name it, I would hand a new manager Munger's thinking before almost anything sitting in the leadership section of the bookstore. And here is why. Most leadership advice tells you what to think. Be more empathetic, be more decisive, give better feedback. But Munger was obsessed with the thing that goes underneath all of that, which is how to think. And he believed that most bad calls don't come from people being dumb. They come from smart people using a narrow set of tools and missing kind of what's right in front of them. And so while most leadership advice tells you what to think or even more so what to do, Munger really cared about how to think. And so as I think about the leadership and executive coaching that I do with leaders day in and day out, a big part of that is practical and really working through immediate challenges or sort of midterm goals. But another big chunk of that is to change the way that they think. And that is truly what shifts and changes their career trajectory. And so I've recently been reading Poor Charlie's Almanack, which is the collection of his talks and his thinking. And what keeps striking me is how cleanly his mental models apply to leading people. He wasn't giving these talks in a leadership context or aiming them at managers. And maybe that is actually exactly what makes them so useful, because they cut underneath the usual language of leadership. So today I'm going to pull out 5 of his models that matter most if you lead a team, and I will show you where each one lands in your actual week, not in theory. So by the end of this, you will have 5 thinking tools that you can reach for next time a decision hits your desk and the answer is not obvious. Now, before we dive into these models, let me give you a quick picture of who he was, because the story is part of the point. Munger originally trained as a lawyer. He actually even built a law practice and did pretty well. But then he walked away from it because he decided that law was trading his hours for money and he wanted to own things that compounded instead. So he partnered with Buffett in the 1970s and spent the next 50 years as the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. He died in late 2023, about a month short of turning 100. And that in itself is pretty impressive. But maybe what's even more impressive is that he was sharp mentally the whole way through. So what really set him apart was not just raw intelligence. Like, Wall Street is full of brilliant people, but what set him apart was range. Munger, as I said earlier, was reading a lot, and he read biology, physics, psychology, history, economics, engineering, you name it. And he treated all of it as one connected toolkit. So he didn't try to compartmentalize what he was reading. He really constantly tried to connect the dots and see it as them all coming together and informing how he lives and how he makes decisions. He actually had a name for this, and he called it a lattice work of mental models. His argument was simple in that. He said that if you only master one discipline, you will force every problem to fit that discipline, right? Whether it fits it or not. So the engineer turns every problem into an engineering problem. The lawyer turns it all into a contract. The finance person reduces it to a spreadsheet. They are all partially blind because reality does not organize itself by department or tools to be applied, right? So if you master only one discipline and one approach, you will kind of force every problem to fit it, and you're going to try to solve it with that same, it's almost calling it a hammer, with that same approach. So Munger, on the other side, he tried to build an opposite approach. And as said, he called this the mental lattice work, where he could look at a situation and ask which models apply here, pulling from several fields at once. And that is the whole game. Not one big idea, but a collection of reliable ones you reach for depending on what is in front of you. So the 5 models I picked each solve a different part of the leadership job. How you decide, how you manage people, how you hold credibility, how you adapt, and how you lead change. And so now that you understand where all this is coming from and that this is multidisciplinary in a way, or this lattice work, let's dive into it and look at how it actually applies to leadership in our day-to-day responsibilities as managers. Model number 1 is called inversion. So Munger loved a line from the mathematician Carl Jacobi, which said, invert, always invert. And the idea is that some problems are almost impossible to solve head on, but they get clear the moment that you flip them around and work backward. So most of us, when we want a good outcome, we might ask, okay, how do I get there? Now, Munger's move was to ask the reverse. How would I guarantee the opposite? What would I do if I wanted this to fail? And then you look at that list and you simply avoid everything on it. And here's where it earns its place in leadership. Say you wanted to build a team, people do not want to leave. Like, you have high retention rates, everyone's fully engaged. So the forward question is kind of big and also maybe vague. Like, how do I build a great culture? You could read 20 books and still not know what to do on Monday morning. But if you invert it and you ask, if I wanted to guarantee my best people quit within a year, what would I do? And that list probably comes to you really fast. I would take credit for their work. I would give very vague feedback they cannot act on and don't know what to do. I would change priorities every week. I would never tell them where they stand. I would promote the loudest person instead of the most effective one. Now you have something real because you know exactly what to do to avoid every item on that list. So the forward question produces kind of like a vibe, something aspirational. But when we invert the question, we can have an immediate to-do list. By the way, a somewhat related or very similar exercise is called the pre-mortem, where we might look at a project we're starting or kicking off, and we'd say, if this project were to fail, what would have happened? And so you're doing that inversion too, where you're not looking at what do we need to do to make this successful, but if that project failed, then what were all the components that didn't go well, or what are all the risks that we have to take care of? And then you address those risks. So that inversion, or that idea of invert, always invert, is a mental model and a framework of how Munger was thinking all the time. And it directly relates to how we lead teams and how we make decisions as managers. So to make this really practical, in a planning meeting for a project, you could say, hey, let's spend 10 minutes on how this could fail before we plan how it succeeds. And watch how fast the real issues come up once you give people permission to name them. Inversion is way easier than answering the big questions of how do we succeed. So that was mental model number 1. Number 2 is the power of incentives. And this is maybe his most quoted line, and for good reason. Show me the incentive and I will show you the outcome. Now, Munger's claim was that incentives are one of the strongest forces on human behavior and that we chronically underestimate them. We look at someone behaving badly and we ask, what is wrong with them? When we should be asking, what is this person being rewarded for? There is well-documented bias here in behavioral research and sometimes called incentive cost bias. People do not experience themselves as corrupt or self-serving. They genuinely come to believe that whatever their incentives pushes them to believe. So the salesperson really thinks you need the upgrade. It is not usually lying. It is the incentive quietly creating that bias. For a leader, this is everywhere, right? And most of it is in our own design. Like the trap, like you might say that you want collaboration, but you only recognize individual sort of heroics in front of the team. So people optimize for visible solo wins and quietly stop helping each other. You say that you want teamwork, but you reward the opposite. You have like individual cost centers, but you want them to collaborate and not create silos. And things like this happen all the time. And when we operate with this mental model, we start to see that you get what you reward and not what you announce or what you talk about. And a quick example here. I worked with a manager who could not understand why his team would not flag problems early. Things kept blowing up late, and then they turned into these fire drills. And when we actually looked at it, the answer was fairly obvious. Every time someone presented a problem to him, they got handed the responsibility for the cleanup on top of their existing work. So what was the incentive? The incentive was pretty clear. Do not bring this man a problem unless you want more work. And he had built a system that basically punished honesty and sort of transparency on problems, and then felt frustrated that nobody was being honest. So the fix wasn't a motivational speech about values and transparency. It was changing what happened when someone raised a flag early. Early flags got help and got treated as good judgment. Late surprises got the harder conversations. And once that was in place, behavior shifted within a matter of weeks because now the incentives were aligned to the actual behavior that manager wanted. So the habit to steal here is this. Whenever you see a pattern on your team you do not like, before you call it a people problem, ask one question. What in your setup is rewarding this behavior? And most of the time, you find the incentive before you find the villain on the team. Okay, quick pause here before we move on to the next models. If this way of thinking is landing for you and you want to build it into how you actually lead, I'd love to tell you a bit more about the Leadership Accelerator. This is our 12-week program that we run for new and early stage managers. People who are good at work, got promoted, and now have to get good at leading other people. We go deep on exactly this kind of thing, like making hard calls with incomplete information and setting up incentives on your team that pull the behavior you actually want. It is run in small cohorts, so you're not doing it alone, but you're also learning with and through other managers who are in the exact same situation as you. We combine coaching, on-demand training, and one-on-one support so that the skills that you learn are applicable to you and actually stick. If you're new to management and you want to be successful because you see how important this is to your career, then don't wing it, but get the proper training that is needed. Just like with any other job and any other profession, you wouldn't just dive into it, but you would get guidance and skill training. And that's what this program is all about. So if that's you or you lead a group of managers and want to build this across the team, the link is in the description to learn more about the Leadership Accelerator. So check that out and we can book a quick call to make sure that this program is the right fit for you. Okay, back to it. Let's talk about model number 3. This is the circle of competence. Munger and Buffett talked about this one constantly. Every person has a circle of things that they genuinely understand. And the size of that circle actually matters far less than knowing where its edge is. So a small circle that you know cold kind of beats a huge circle with fuzzy borders. So in short, knowing the edge of your circle of competence is worth more than the size of it. And Munger's point was really that the danger is not incompetence. The danger is competence in one area that you wrongly assume carries over to another. Like you are brilliant at the thing you were promoted for, and so you assume you are just as sharp 2 steps outside of it. And that is exactly where you make the expensive mistakes. For a leader, the application is about credibility. And it actually kind of runs against our instincts, because when you become the manager, there's this pressure to have the answer for everything because you think that you're the most competent. That's why you became the manager. So if your team asks a question, then you saying that you don't know the answer to that totally feels like a crack in your authority, and you might worry about losing people's respect and trust. So what do managers tend to do? They tend to bluff. And it's not that obvious that they feel it, but they're just kind of pretending as if they know, trying to sort of work off of competences and knowledge that they've previously built. And so what happens is they give a confident answer in a domain that they do not actually understand, and the team will likely pick it up. If not the first time, then likely the second, and most definitely the third time around. And so here's what Munger understood. He knew that saying, "I don't know," in front of your team builds more trust than faking it ever does. Because the moment that you bluff and you get caught, every confident thing that you say after that gets discounted. And people lose the ability to tell when you actually do know, because everything now is being questioned. So the leaders who hold credibility, they do the opposite. They are precise about the edge of their circle. It may sound something like this. Hey, this is outside of what I know well, so let's pull in someone who lives in that area or who does this type of work. Then give me until tomorrow to catch up and come back with a better answer. This is not weakness. It tells your team your confidence means something because you only spend it when you have earned it. And this, by the way, is also what makes delegation actually work. When you're honest that someone on your team knows the domain better than you do, handing it to them is not losing control. It is using your circle really well. And you do not have to be the biggest expert in the room. That is not what management by definition is. You have to know who it is, who to pull in, and you need to know where your edge sits. Now, quick side note, if you feel like, well, I don't know things enough and I'm not here for long enough and I'm still new, I'm going to drop a link to an episode in the show notes because this is a balancing act to strike. You might personally feel like you don't know and you doubt yourself more. And so you will want to go check with your manager and get validation or approval for your decisions. Or you might just keep saying that you don't know and you're still new, when in fact you do know. So while we're talking here about know the edge of your competence, that goes both ways. You don't want to shrink it as much as you don't want to enlarge it and make it fuzzy. Know where it is and then operate within that with agency. That's really important. The biggest one that I see here for new managers specifically is that when we think we did well as an individual contributor, then we assume and project that we will also naturally be a great manager. And literally, it couldn't be further from the truth. These are two completely different skill sets that only partially translate to a degree, because yes, competence still matters. But leadership, people management, and your individual IC technical skills, so to speak, not the same things. And so learning how to become a good leader and manager is very different from the competence that you've built so far. And if you don't see that these things don't translate, you're likely going to feel the pain down the road. If not in the beginning, because maybe you were handed an amazing high-performing team and everything goes smoothly, the moment people problems start to arise, and they eventually always do, that is where it will show how competent you are on the leadership front. If you have gaps there because you've never done any training, never gotten the support to really build the toolkits and the fundamentals of what it means to lead people well, you haven't built a leadership system, that will show. This is what we want to prevent with doing proper training and building a reliable leadership system. Okay, so with that said, let's move on to model number 4. This is the man with a hammer. Munger had a famous warning about what happens when you only have one tool. So to the man with only a hammer, the one tool, every problem looks like a nail. And he literally did call this the man with a hammer tendency. When you have only one approach and it's worked for you, you're going to start to apply it to every situation, including the ones where it is the wrong tool. And you do not notice because the hammer feels like competence. This is a blind spot. We actually feel pretty good using that hammer. So in leadership, this shows up as a default management style that you run on everyone. Maybe your hammer is accountability. You are great at holding a firm line. So you hold a firm line with everyone, including the person who is already anxious and just actually needs some encouragement to take a risk. Their problem is not that they're going to drop the ball because they have this sense of reliability and work ethic already built in, it's ingrained, but they're too risk averse. So what you actually need to do as a manager is not to hammer in the accountability part. It's to actually bring them forward, to help them sort of rise up and take some risks. Maybe your hammer is coaching, in fact, and you love asking thoughtful questions and really sitting with people and work through problem. And so now you start asking questions even when the building is on fire and the person needs you to just make the call. They need you decisive and in charge. The coaching tool is an amazing tool and actually totally underused in the vast majority of cases. But the same tool, and using that tool in every situation, regardless of what the moment needs, that is the problem. Now, there is a cognitive reason this is hard to catch in ourselves because our attention narrows around what we are good at. And so we notice the cues that fit our favorite tool, confirmation bias, and we miss the ones that do not fit our favorite tool. So basically, your strength quietly edits internally what you're able to see and what you are missing. So the move here is to build a couple of other tools, and more importantly, a trigger to reach for them, like the awareness to recognize, oh, wait a second, when this happens, I should not pick that tool. So before you respond to a situation on autopilot, we become aware and we run a quick check. Hold on. What does this person in this moment actually need from me? Is it direction or is it space? Is it a push or a backstop? And the answer changes who you need to be in that conversation. And borrow from outside of your own function too. Like if you came up through engineering, let's say, the best move in a messy people situation might come from sales or from a teacher or from a coach that you've experienced. Sometimes people in coaching conversations will say, oh my gosh, my marriage therapist said that too. It's like, oh, maybe she doesn't need you to fix the problem. Maybe she needs you to ask, how can I help? What do you need from me? Yeah, exactly. Maybe that is something that applies at work too, and test it out and see how that works with certain people. Maybe they don't need you to fix it. They just need to be heard. So Munger's whole point with this was that the person with 5 tools will always beat the person with 1 tool applied in every single situation, because the situation will always shift. So for managers particularly, this is about understanding that there is not the one ideal leadership style. It's knowing what is your personal sort of default and then being able to pivot and shift based on sort of where is the whole organization in its stage? Is this a growth phase? Is this a transformative phase? Is this a sort of establishment or solidifying phase? All these different phases require different leadership styles. Then, on top of that, your team needs a different leadership style based on the context within the organization. Each individual team member is going to need you to show up slightly differently. And then every problem that you're dealing with requires different tools. Now, this may sound complex, but it's not complicated. It just means to pause and to reflect on what is the right tool to use in this given situation, and to be a bit more intentional about it and really think about this before you jump into action, usually based on what comes most natural to us. this would be our blind spot. Okay, this was model number 4 that I wanted to cover. So let's talk about the 5th one, our final one. This is the 2-track analysis. This one is the most useful model on the list for the moment we are all in right now. And I don't think many people really talk about it or apply it on purpose. Munger said that to understand any situation, you have to analyze it on 2 separate tracks. Track 1 is the rational factors. What actually governs the situation if you reason it through, like all the logic, right? The real interests, the numbers, the merits, all of that. And then track 2 is the psychological factors, the subconscious stuff pushing people toward conclusions that have nothing to do with the merits. There's fear, loss aversion, status, ego, the need to not look foolish in front of peers, and all of that. And Munger's insight was that most people in making decisions will analyze track 1 only, and then they are baffled when track 1 logic does not win or yield the results they were going for. Track 1 is the merits. Track 2 is the fear. They're not the same conversation. And by the way, highly analytical people will often overestimate the importance of track 1 and almost ignore track 2. So look at what leaders are sitting in right now. You and many others are probably rolling out a new AI tool that genuinely makes the work faster. Or you are bringing the team back into the office a few days a week, this return to office trend. Now, on track 1, you have a clean, rational case. Here's the efficiency, here's the data, here's why this is good. And you present it, and then you might hit a wall of resistance. That makes no sense to you because the logic is airtight and so obvious, right? The logic is airtight on track 1, true, but the resistance is living entirely on track 2. The person fighting the AI rollout is not actually debating productivity. They are scared the tool makes them replaceable. The person resisting return to office is not really arguing about commute minutes, although I'm sure that is annoying and does suck. It might be a lot more about status or autonomy or the fact that they reorganize their whole life around the old setup and they feel now this is slipping and it's change coming and that doesn't feel comfortable. So if you keep arguing track 1 harder and louder and with more data, you're going to lose because you're not answering a question they're probably not even asking on the track 2 side of things. So before you respond to resistance, stop and think this through. Is this a thinking problem, track 1, or a feeling problem, track 2? If it is track 1, right, bring better information. If it's track 2, no spreadsheet and additional data point will fix it. You have to name the fear, grant that it's real, talk about it, like try to uncover it in conversations before you choose how to address it. 2 separate tracks. And that is the 5th mental model that Charlie Munger practiced and I think is greatly relevant for leadership. So there are your 5. It's invert the problem to find what to avoid, follow the incentives to explain the behavior, work inside your circle of competence, and name its edge, watch for the hammer that turns every situation in the same response, and then read every hard moment on the 2 tracks, the logic and the psychology. So most people try to collect like tactics as they try to get better, like the 5 magic words for this conversation, the perfect template for that meeting. Now, tactics are fine, but they do break the second the situation changes because they were built for one specific case. What Munger spent his life collecting was not tactics. It was thinking models, thinking tools, models that hold up across 100 different situations because they work on the underlying structure, not the surface. And that is the difference between reacting and leading. When a hard situation lands on your desk and there's no playbook for it, the person with a few good models does not panic. They reach for one. Where are the incentives pointing? Is this track 1 or track 2? The situation stops happening to you and starts being something that you can work by applying it to your different models. This is also, by the way, the line between the individual contributor and the leader. As an IC, you got rewarded for knowing the answer, the tactic, right? The right answer existed and you found it. Now, as a leader, most of the situations that you face do not have a clear answer waiting somewhere. They're usually ambiguous because you are being paid to think well in conditions others aren't prepared for. That is a different job, and with that, it asks a different question of you. So here's what I encourage you to think about this week. When a problem hits your desk, are you reaching for a tactic or a way of thinking? Are you arguing the merits when the real issue is fear or a feeling? Are you building your own lattice work or still swinging the one hammer you walked in with on day one? These are some of the questions I encourage you to really think through and sit with, some food for thought. If this was useful, please hit subscribe. I will see you in the next episode of the Manager Track podcast. Bye for now. If you enjoyed this episode, then check out 2 other awesome resources to help you become a leader people love to work with. This includes a free masterclass on how to successfully lead as a new manager. Check it out at arcova.org/masterclass. The second resource is my best-selling book, The Confident and Competent New Manager: How to Quickly Rise to Success in Your First Leadership Role. Check it out at arcova.org/books or head on over to Amazon and grab your copy there.